3, 2. Well, I am thrilled to have Mark Noguchi here with me. Mark, am I saying your name right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. I have, I'll say known Mark. I first encountered Mark several years ago at a Marin Interfaith Council event. I think it was at Green Gulch, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
But I remember we spoke some about your experiences and practices in Buddhism. And I thought it would be an interesting conversation to share with my community, not only because of that, because we have many people at Westminster who are interested in other faiths and other traditions, but because I know that your story weaves through more than one tradition. And I'm going to let you tell that, because I think that will be interesting to folks, because I know a lot of my people, a lot of the people with whom I share a religious community, are interested beyond simply the Christian or Presbyterian tradition. But maybe before we get right into that, we could even take a step back and you could tell us a little bit of your story and your family history and kind of how you got to be where you are. So with that, I'll just say welcome and invite you to share a little bit about your background with us.
Okay, I could get very lengthy, but I'll try not to.
I know the feeling.
Yeah.
My people know what happens when I get lengthy.
When you get older too, you have a lot of experience behind you. I think when you get to this part of your life, I'm in my 60s, and you grow up in a place like Marin, and you're always a little bit different. You're almost forced to really look at yourself compared to the greater whole. So the greater whole is mostly affluent white people. Then you look at how am I different, and how did I come with my views? And when you hear other people espousing their views, you go, wow, I wonder where that came from, because that's sort of not my point of view here. And so I think for me, I really thought a lot about who I am as a Japanese American Buddhist. And so when I went, and here's an example. So I study with my Jewish friends. And when it comes to that time of the year where it's called the Elul and High Holy Days, one of the guys, my Jewish friend says, Mark, do you people, something, he's kind of saying, like, do you Buddhists do anything similar to atoning for your sins to God? And I always have to go, well, I don't want to insult anybody, but I just said, well, we don't really emphasize God, and we don't really talk about sin, and we don't have this sense that we need to apologize to God. But that doesn't mean we don't have a moral compass. That the non-harming is a really important part of the Buddhist path. I guess what I'm trying to tell you, Rob, is that you are reminded quite often of being a little bit of an outlier, and you get used to explaining yourself.
Interesting.
Huh?
Oh, no, I just said that it's interesting because it's not a reality that I have, because in almost everywhere I've been the insider. I don't have that experience.
Yeah. So at some point, I'm not really insulted. I just kind of go, okay, you're curious. I always think you want the short story, the long story. So anyway, the story that I kind of told you, Rob, in my short bio is that my grandparents came from Japan. And I always say, just like the Italian grandparents and the Irish grandparents, all the different immigrants that came in the turn of the century, and what they brought with them, and I'll use let's say the Italians as an example. So they brought their Italian culture, their Italian personalities, their Catholicism probably. And that kind of percolates into the family just as much as the Japanese sensibility, so to speak, and the Buddhist teachings filter into the kids, so that by the time you get to third generation, I'm watching baseball. I'm as American as the third generation Italian American, but they went home to their grandma, and the grandma maybe speaks a little bit of English, but maybe mostly Italian, cooks Italian food. And they've got the Catholic, that faith is part of sort of, even if you don't go to church, it's still part of your makeup. So my Catholic friends would talk about Mass and, the Virgin Mary, and those are things that I didn't know anything about. And so the Buddhism is sort of there in ways that you don't have confession. And I can think of all these things we didn't have to do. So my grandparents on both sides came to this country about turn of the century, and then fast forward, then the internment camps happened, and most people, it's surprising, some people don't get it, but during World War II, all the Japanese were rounded up for a lot of reasons that were rationalized. And I think that really left a lasting scar on who they were. And if you do know any Japanese Americans, that generation didn't talk about it. We didn't learn as kids, And we'd say, oh, this is the Nakamura's. I go, oh, hi. And then the little kid, and they say, we met them in camps. And we go, when did you guys go camping? And they would not, but they say that you're too young to understand. But they still wouldn't talk about it. And I've heard this story told in many, many families that generation did just not want to talk about it. Again, that's another level of conversation, Rob, that I could help out. Some other.
Well, yeah, I'm wondering. I mean, it's a naive question, but I just don't know. Why do you think they didn't talk about it?
Well, again, Rob, when I always say I'm speaking about my own experience and my own knowledge, there's a lot of other Japanese Americans that may have some ideas. And I think in the case of my dad, I don't think he wanted to bring up things that would then create anger. Because then you go, why get bitter and bring up things that are the past, right? I mean, we can learn from the past, but why bring up things because it doesn't solve any purpose. It just makes you angry. And as you probably know from little Buddhism you do know about, is that holding on to things like anger, disappointment, jealousy, all those things, those are the emotional mind states that really kind of can just eat you up. And so I think in many ways he would just, it's not like denying it, but maybe when you get older. And when he got older, he told me, maybe I was in my 50s, tell me more about how he resented the experience. But again, it didn't dwell on it. And again, it's just different personalities. I asked my mom when she was in nursing care, and she was a little bit, well, she had a little bit of dementia, but she was still able to have cognizant conversation. I said, Mom, I've never, ever asked you this question. I said, are you at all angry about what happened during the war? And I swear you had to be there. She just goes, well, it's just what we had to do at the time. And I learned secretarial, and I made really good friends that are still my friends today. And I said, and you're not angry at all? And she goes, well, what would be the point? And I looked at her and I just thought, wow. I said, she really sort of embodies really like a spiritual person. I almost felt like bowing to her then. But she was that way in the world. She had made all kinds of friends, and she wasn't racist. She just she loved everybody. And so again, personality wise, there's just some people that endured things, and then there's some people that they're going to be angry about everything. And I think because my dad was the oldest of his family, there were like 8 brothers and sisters. He was like in his early 20s. He's old enough to kind of say, this is a pretty bad deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then again, moving forward, I guess fast forward here is that I think I wrote you this in the bio, because of that experience, I think his response was, I'm going to raise my kids, and I'm not going to inculcate them with racist ideas. I'm not going to talk badly about Catholics or Jews or people of other faith traditions. And then he was an engineer, and so he worked with people all over the world. So when I cleaned his house up, I found books on Muhammad and the Holy Bible, which I still use when I go to Bible study. And he read the Bible, had parts underlined. So I guess as you're smiling at Rob, I'm thinking, as I went into the Marin Interfaith Council, my wife would just sort of smile and say, you're just like your dad. It's in your DNA.
So that's what I was going to say. So it's really in your biography. I mean, to sort of spill some of the things, you went on to become the chair of the board of the Marin Interfaith Council. I know you have.
I'm on the board. Yeah.
And you're still on the board. And I know you've been in Christian communities. I know you go to Torah study right now. So, but this started with your family of origin, with your parents bringing you up intentionally with some of those sensibilities. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so. And I always like to tell this story because, as we're talking now, it's very topical about race relationships and the way people pigeonhole people and put them into categories. I still remember going to UC Davis and my college dorm mate. He goes, Mark. He goes, I need to talk to you. He goes, I know who the Jew haters are in the dorm. And I'm going, okay. And Ted starts telling me Susan and Bob and blah, blah, and he has a list of like 10 people. And I went, okay, so are you like a Jewish person? Because I'm thinking like, if you're telling me who Jew haters are, I'm thinking, I said, and he looks at me like I'm supposed to know he's Jewish. And I said, Ted, you look like a typical white guy that I went to school with. I mean, I just see you as Ted with a bicycle that has insanely sleeps in a sleeping bag on the top bunk and has a window open. I think it was a short conversation, but I said, Ted, I don't go through life thinking like you're like a Jewish guy. I mean, it's easier to me to go, oh, there's like two other Asians in this dorm because the Asians are easy to pick out, and there's a black guy. But otherwise, everyone else to me is like a big sea of white people. And I always remember that with his smile, as I thought, wow, I guess people go through life and they say he's Jewish,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking like, what's the difference? And the same thing with, like I said, different faith traditions is that this is another aside, but it's kind of related. When I was growing up, I still remember this. I was elementary school or something, and somebody said something about the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, and I just go, what's the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost? Because I don't know. I wasn't raised in that tradition.
This was in public school, right?
Yeah, public school. And this little girl, again, it's just her response. She goes, you don't know about the Holy Trinity? And I went, I don't. And she goes, don't you go to church? And I go, yes. He goes, where do you go to church? I said, I'm going like this. I go to a Buddhist church. And she goes, Buddhist church? Do you pray to Buddha? And I'm going like, no. And I remember I just slithered away, totally embarrassed and feeling ashamed that I wasn't a Christian. And then as years later, I'm an adult now, I'm just thinking, that's not how Buddhists are raised. You're not raised to think that you've got the answer and you're going to tell the world to, come be Buddhists, right? That's so arrogant. So again, over the years, Rob, I've kind of gone, when you grow up like that, then I can understand these legislators that, bang, the gavel, and they say, we're going to have prayer in school and da-da-da. I'm going like, well, where do you come from with that? Where's this tolerance for other ways of being in the world, which is how I was raised, which I guess I would say, Rob, is why when I first found out about Marin Interfaith Council, so immediately drawn to it, because I'm just thinking, I want to know about the other faith traditions. There are other ways to be in this world. I married a Christian, and she goes to church. I mean, in 38 years, at some point, you realize you have to get along with each other. And then I started going to Bible study because I wanted to find out. I really didn't know much about the Bible. Except I watched how people would take the Bible, twist it around and say, well, here's some readings that say that's why gays are being punished. And I'm going, whoa, I think something's being really warped here. So I almost went to Bible study just because I wanted to have an argument with those narrow-minded Christians about how they were warping the narrative. And then as it would turn out, I meet this rabbi by chance who's visiting, and Rodef Shalom, and I'm going, I really don't know much about Judaism. I know they don't have the Jesus Christ narrative, but I know that they study what they call the Torah. So I met this rabbi, and she was speaking about the Jewish holidays and her explanation from her perspective. And I went, wow, this is really fascinating.
And this is Rabbi Ilana at Rodef Shalom, right?
Well, no, this was a visiting rabbi from
Los Angeles. I see.
So I was intrigued because this was like the second annual rabbi in residence. I said, okay, this has got to be an important person. And so again, if you have an open mind, I'm thinking like, okay, I don't see a whole lot of Black, Hispanic, or Asian people in this audience, but I want to go to this. And then Rabbi Stacy sees me later on. I said, Rabbi, I just loved this. And she said, come to Torah study. Anyway, but then I have to tell you, I felt a little self-conscious at first going, because I just thought, this is for Jewish people, and maybe they don't want outsiders. Maybe this is their place where they can be with Jewish community where, they've had a lot of bad stuff happening in their history. So I don't want to intrude on their space.
Sure.
But as the years go by, pretty soon Noguchi becomes a regular. And then as I meet Rabbi Ilana, and she's totally into this interfaith, everything.
As I hear you talk, what I hear is you moving through the world with kind of an ethos of curiosity. Yes. So rather than saying, I'm going to go and equip myself to battle everybody or be afraid of everybody, so defend myself, even if the threat is often imaginary, you sort of go around the world saying, oh, that sounds interesting. Let me learn about that. Ooh, this is intriguing. I don't know much. I want to go find out.
Right.
How did that curiosity set in, and how do we invite people into that? Because it seems like such a more fruitful way to move through the world.
Yeah, it's got to be a little bit of DNA, like it's just part of who I am. Like when my friend Gerald, who I grew up with, and I'll tell you a story about him. He's also Japanese American, and Kay, my wife, the Presbyterian, tells Gerald, Mark's I'm going to Jewish studies, at the temple. And Joe just goes, yeah, that's Mark. He's always been kind of a curious guy. So I think I've always kind of been that way. But again, the other part, and I really think it's deeply seated, having been on the outside, and I always tell people, people now go, oh, Dalai Lama, blah, 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 Buddhism is really cool. And I say, no, 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 no. You go back to the 50s, and where the majority of people you're with are white, and you already had your parents that were in camps. Then they come out, and, they're told, like, keep a low profile. White people don't like us. You certainly don't, run out there with a big flag saying, hey, I'm a Buddhist too. You guys like
Right.
that?
It's easy for some of us who've only come to this area recently to think that it's always been cool and a fad, and
No. You kept the lid on things, and I think because of that, when you come from that kind of a tradition, then you kind of go, okay, what are those people quietly doing in the corner there? It's like maybe I should find out, what their wisdom teachings are about.
Yeah.
And so I remember, back in my first day at tour study, I've already got a little piece of sweat because I'm like, what am I doing here? I have no idea what I'm reading either, right? And then this guy Marv goes, so Marco, what brings you to tour study? And I went, you want the long story or the short story? And he goes, the short story is fine. So I said, well, it's intriguing to me as a Buddhist to see all these white people, that come to Spirit Rock, and they're doing these chantings and all this. I'm thinking, like, okay, this was not, when I was growing up, like every once in a while you look back and you see some odd, unusual white guy in the temple. So I just said, long story short, is that if other people from other traditions can find something from Buddhism, right, to add to their belief system, then why can't I, as a Buddhist, maybe find some wisdom teachings in Judaism? Marv goes, good answer. So
Wow.
that's what I would say is that. And then lucky for me is that here in Marin County, that our places of worship are so progressive. So as you probably know with the Rabbi Alana and Stacy, they're very involved in the Marin Interfaith Council.
Yeah.
And so they're very open to having, like, their mission statement probably says something about interfaith marriages and things like this.
Well, I wonder though if Buddhism lends itself maybe more than my tradition to taking that approach that you described as finding what could be added to your practice from other traditions. I think that way of being is very much in line with an evolved way of being religious in whatever religion, or certainly within my own. But I think so many people, even people who come to a church like Westminster, want to do that. They want to go and find what particular gifts other traditions have to offer and add that to their own journey, but sort of secretly feel like they're not supposed to, that they might get in trouble if they do that, because Christianity carries this baggage of our way is the only way. And it's very hard for people to slough that off.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. It's easier to be a Buddhist and then put your tendrils into other things because, as you know, Buddhism is based on the teachings of the Buddha, who is never pretended to be anything but a human being. He achieved a state of enlightenment that very few people can reach, but he said, you too can get there. But there wasn't a sense that he did miracles that, so you read, the water into wine and miracles that Jesus did. He didn't do that. And so there's no really strict sense of saying, this is Buddhism, these are the rules, and you can't step outside these boundaries. Unless maybe you're a monk. But otherwise, because of that, I call it the squishy religion, because there's no right or wrongness to it. So because Buddhism teaches non-attachment to ideas, right? You can read Thich Nhat Hanh's precepts. He's a Vietnamese Buddhist, but he says, don't be deeply attached to this dogma, even Buddhist ones, because that creates suffering. Wow. So if you already start from a faith tradition that says, look, take it or leave it, but don't believe everything you hear. Don't believe that teacher. Just find the right teacher and stick with it. And if it's time to move on, move on. And if you were to have a Zen Buddhist and another kind of Buddhist argue about who's right, both of them would probably say no right or wrongness, right?
Wow.
So the Zen people do the Zen thing, and then the Vipassana people do the other thing. But I don't think any of them would say, I have a better path, because that's not Buddhism. Because then you would say you're attached to your form of Buddhism. Does that make sense, Rob?
Yeah, sure. And it's so funny when you contrast it to our history, which is filled with contests of who's right. and who's right to the exclusive wrongness of the other. I mean, that's not
Yeah.
everybody in our
Yeah.
tradition, but we have
Yeah.
a long legacy of that. And your point about Jesus is well taken, but it's also points to something that's tragic, because even though there are moments where Jesus is seems to be exceptional, there are also moments in our texts where Jesus says, you can do this too and more. But we have taken those pieces and suppressed them and made him exclusively the other. And in doing so, I think we've actually kept people separate and kept people from fulfilling who they could be, because we've put him on such a pedestal that he's only other. One of the teachers I follow is a man named Philip Newell, and he's a sort of a Celtic spirituality teacher. And he says, in American, or he's British, Western, white culture, we make Jesus as other as possible. But he said, not everybody's like that. He said, you go to South America or Central America, and you'll find people named Jesus or Jesus all the time. In fact, our sexton at Westminster is named Jesus. But white culture wouldn't dare name a child Jesus, because Jesus is so above, is so other. And he said, isn't the other way such a healthier relationship with Jesus? And I thought, wow, what an insight. We've made him so other that we couldn't dare come near, so we don't try. We settle for worshiping him rather than following him or attending to his teachings or trying to embody them ourselves. Now, you've talked a number of times already today about being in rooms where most people are white. And I can't imagine what going through the world would be like to be the person in the room who doesn't look like many of the people in the room. And I've heard you talk before about scanning the room. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Well, okay. I'm laughing because you have to have some levity in all this. I think I think guys are kind of dense. We're just
discharged.
I think my sisters were more attuned to this than I was. But I think when I was a little kid, I just would just blend in. I just played with all my friends and did all things that we did as kids. And then I haven't told the story for so long, but then one day, I think it was junior high school, or maybe sixth grade or something around that time. And then the teacher goes, "You must be the Noguchi kid," or something like that. And I went, "Wow, yeah, you're right." And then I went, "Well," so I kind of go, "Oh, you're the only Asian person here." Then I remember that was like a shift, because I realized, oh wow, that's why they know who I am, because they say, "Oh, you must be Bonnie's brother." So then I kind of go, "Well, you're going to stick out." And then you're reminding me that when I was in junior high school, I thought I got in trouble with the police, explosives or something, just doing mischievous things. But I just thought, even I remember this now. I thought, there's so few of us. I have a reputation. If I get in trouble with the police or do things like that, this is also a Japanese thing. I will shame my community, because then the white people will look at that behavior of mine and say, "Look at those Japanese. They're misbehaved kids and all this kind of business." So.
But isn't that an enormous amount of pressure? I mean, if when I'm in trouble or was in trouble as a younger person, it never occurred to me that I'm carrying a whole people with me. Maybe my family, maybe. But it would never cross my mind that somehow I'm bringing shame upon a whole group of people. That's an enormous weight to
carry. Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, part of the Japanese philosophy too is that if you get in trouble, it's not just you. You are now shaming the entire family. That's kind of the Japanese thing. But even as I tell you this story, Rob, it was a little blip. It wasn't stuff I carried all the time. But it is one of those things where, again, if you went, these are gentle things. You go to a party, and I was in band, so all the band people hung out with each other. But you go to a party, and then usually one of the parents would say, "Oh, hi, Mark, are you Japanese or Chinese?" And then you'd go, "I'm Japanese," and they'll say something like, "Oh, I just love Japanese food." And then you're going like, "Okay," just trying to make it.
Wow.
I mean, they're trying to be nice.
Yeah.
But if you and I walked into a party, the mother would not say, "Oh, Rob, you must be German or French," or something like that, right? So you kind of get used to that, and you just kind of go, "Okay, well, they're just trying to be nice." But it wasn't in Marin County, again, it wasn't overt racism, but you still get little things like Ching Chong Chinaman and whatever was going on at the time. I think more importantly that what I told you in the little bio thing is, though, again, growing up Asian in a mostly white community, is that I'm older than you are, but Jerry Lewis used to make all these funny comedy films. But if you go back to the '60s, they
Yeah.
did all kinds of caricatures of buck teeth and glasses and all this, and then we watched Breakfast at Tiffany's, and then
Mark, it's funny you say that, and you brought that up when you wrote to me.
yeah,
Breakfast at Tiffany's was on, or no, I was watching a documentary on Bruce Lee, and they showed all these clips of those awful Asian
yeah,
stereotypes, and
right,
that's in a scene from Breakfast at Tiffany's, and it blew my mind, and that
yeah,
was all folks saw.
right. And people see at that time, and then remember Bonanza? Hop Singh was like a little cook, and he was a laughable character. He's kind of cute, but he's again, it's diminishing the
Right.
role of the Asians. But we had to watch that, and we'd be embarrassed seeing that. We would slither in our seats. But again, it's like in the larger context of of of, of consciousness for white people, is that we were not meant to feel that we were as good as whites, and the movies extend that kind of stereotype.
Yeah.
I mean, I can look at it now, but I just thought, yeah, we would just slither, and we'd be ashamed, and we wished that we weren't Asian because what we saw depicted. Again, it's one of those things where I suppose you could say, well, maybe Italians were always portrayed as mobsters, and Irish were like the drunken cop or
Yeah.
something. I'm sure there are other stereotypes out there. And then I'm sure that if you asked Jewish people, whatever ways they may have been stereotyped or fit into a category of something negative.
But you're always aware of that level of identity. And I remember you saying, you go into a room or
Yeah.
and one of the things you do, you start looking around, right?
You look around, you kind of go, okay, I'm the only person of color here, and then you just a little bit on alert because you're ready for that question, right? It might come. And then interestingly, when I joined the Marin Interfaith Council, and I was having dinner at our fall retreat, and I was sitting with Khadija, Khadija.
Yes, sure. The Islamic Center, yeah.
And the conversation came up, and she's like 30 something years younger than me, and she goes to Tam High School, and we somehow it came up, and she goes, she does the same thing. She does the minority suite. She'll go into a room because she obviously looks like a person of color, but we sort of laughed at it because they said, oh my God, even years later we still do that.
The minority suite, yeah, that's what you called it, yeah.
Yeah. And then when I used to go to these Spirit Rock retreats, and my wife, who's white, would say, she goes like this, how many people of color were there? And I'm going, out of 100, about 6. And she goes, really? I said, okay, it's Marin County, it's just the way it is. Yeah. And it's a non-issue after that. But we can take that conversation further. But
yeah, but in a way it's not a non-issue, because I think Marin, maybe like other places in different forms, has a double identity or a shadow side. I mean, it gets held up all the time as really this progressive and open and
right.
welcoming culture, but that's not the experience I hear from some people.
Right. As we know from our friend Ashley, who was the theological student, and she had a very bad incident happening in San Anselmo. And that's another story.
Say more about that.
Well, she's an African American woman, and I remember I quietly asked her. I said, "Hey, Ashley, how's living?"
Oh, Ashley, yes.
Remember Ashley?
Yeah.
And again, sometimes it helps to be a non-white person, but she looks around, she goes, "This is the most racist place I've ever lived." And I'm going, "Really?"
Wow.
San Anselmo? And she proceeded to tell me that she was being followed when she was shopping somewhere. I mean, little things. She's walking down the street, and some woman on the same side of the street walks to the other side of the street. Again, it's like I have to believe that this is her reality. The only way to really know this would be like if you could actually transplant your brain into the body of a tall black man, right?
Yeah.
Or a woman, and see how the world is looking at you.
And I've heard a version of that story from more than one person of color from the seminary. I mean, I remember one of the professors, African American woman, was talking about Ross as a sundown town, meaning if you're not white and you're in Ross, you better be at the bus stop or on your way by sundown, because it's likely you're hired help, And if you're not, people are going to stop you and wonder what you're doing there. And that, I mean, blew my white mind. Just blew my mind.
Yeah, a lot of us just kind of go, yeah.
Exactly.
And then I'm not lying. I'm just sort of saying things don't surprise me anymore.
Yeah.
It's even more surprising when I see the naivety of some people saying, "Oh no, Marin County is very progressive." I'll just go, okay, I don't get angry because that serves no purpose. But that's the part of going like, well, you got a lot to learn, or you don't have to learn, right? And I think there's a lot of people that don't feel like they need to think differently.
Yeah.
Whereas I think with our group and our Interfaith Council, because of the diversity, we have to be of the mindset to kind of go, there's other ways of thinking about the world. There's different lenses. There's Jewish lenses, Muslim lenses, right? But we have that ability to say we can step out of this box here. I think there's plenty of people out there that say they don't need to step outside of their box.
Well, and the way our community is set up, it's easy to go through your world and not run into those folks because we have a pretty segregated county. And so it's easy to keep to your own. It's interesting that you keep bringing up the Interfaith Council as an avenue for this, which I agree, because religion sometimes, and some religion, has been the key sort of offender in keeping people in their own enclave or in their own sense of superiority. Not all traditions, but some. So I love the notion that religion could actually be the vessel to understanding the other rather than judging the other.
Yeah, I think it comes from the who's teaching, the ministers. I think if you have a progressive rabbi and a progressive Presbyterian minister speaking on, I think it was Christ Presbyterian Church, my wife's church in Terra Linda, and Linda was doing a sermon, and I thought, wow, she was talking about impermanence, which is a Buddhist concept. I was going, she was doing like a little bit of an interfaith spin there, and I just thought, that's how you get out of a boxed way of thinking. You get people kind of curious, and maybe you start getting sermons that are a little bit unusual, but you get the congregants to think that there's other ways of thinking besides maybe what you've heard in the last 30 years.
Yeah. So what do you think, you as someone who's really taken this curiosity approach to spirituality as well as other aspects of your life, what is the gift of religion, the potential gift of religion to us today?
Thanks for the warning for that one.
You said you had till 4:30. It's only 1:30.
What's the potential gift? Again, I love that smile, Rob. I can only speak for myself.
Of course.
And as I told you, when I was a teenager, I was looking at the ways that people were in the world. And it seemed like the Western model is go to school, get a degree, get a good paying job, buy a house, get stuff, get promoted, make more stuff, make more money, perpetuate that whole thing, buy more stuff, get kids, send them to good schools, that whole thing. And I thought, there might be another way to go through life than that. And so, I guess to answer your question, I think there's wisdom in all the teachings. And I think that if you are serious about looking at the teachings, you can take the wisdoms of the teachings, have that in the background of your mind, and have that be your spiritual anchor about how you make every decision going through life. Here's a small example. So one of my friends I really like it, Rodef Shalom, he was a lawyer, and he was talking to one of his clients, and he said, okay, as a lawyer, here's what you can do, blah, 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 and it'll all be legal. He goes, but now I'm talking to you as a Jew. What do you think is the right thing to do and the right decision to be making right now? And so I for me, as a Buddhist, primarily, is that it's not about a question of like, oh, wow, you go to 10 retreats a year and you meditate for 16 hours in the lotus position. It's really that's fine. And meditation has a lot of benefits. But really, what I think the core of this, and I've talked to old Buddhist practitioners that say, as the older I get, cushion time, sitting on the cushion. Cushion time is less important than what I am doing every moment. So every moment of your life, are you able to be like this? Are you able to be mindful of going, oh, I'm being prejudiced right now. I'm being judgmental. Someone zooms by and I'm going, whoa. And so instead of being judgmental and saying, you stupid, whatever, expletive, you might be able to make a choice and kind of go, whoa, boy, that person's in a hurry. I hope they're not rushing out to the hospital. I hope they're not in some kind of pain, right? So what you're doing with Buddhist practice is watching how you're reacting and responding to people. And then is my mind open and clear? Am I judging this person? And if you're mindful, you're okay. Here's this big, tall black guy. Am I coming up with some ideas, or here's some homeless person? Am I now drawing a whole story about that person? And I know nothing about the background of that homeless person and how they got there. So again, answer your question. I believe, and I don't know how other people practice. I think if you call yourself a Christian, it should be something that you're doing all the time. It's not like I go to church every Sunday. Right. I know all the hymns. I know that. I donate thousands, right, to the building fund and all this. But then the next day you're out and you're yelling at somebody. I mean, to me, if you're going to be a Christian, you should be acting as a Christian in almost every aspect of your life. And then
it's a very practical way to think about religion. And I know Christianity, one of its pitfalls is that we get stuck in our head, and it's all about ideas and accepting certain sort of theological claims, which may or may not have any bearing on your life. But what you're reminding us, no, all of this exists to shape the way we show up in the world, right? I mean, otherwise, what's the point? I think for Christians, at times, the point has been to escape this world, but I think that misses the point.
Well, you're making a good point. And once we're having an argument about heaven and hell,
right?
And my wife I forgot how the story was, but she said, if you're in a really bad situation, you're poor and you've got health problems, and you're in a third world country, some religion says that there's this heavenly place that you're going to go after you die. It gives you hope. But if you're comfortable and, well, theoretically comfortable, your mind might be crazy, but if you're comfortably well off in Marin, you can maybe have an intellectual argument about heaven and hell. So I would never say that that's a bad narrative.
Right.
That particular narrative may really work well in a poor third world country. But and when you're in a place like Marin, as you know, many people say, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, right? That's the whole thing you hear a lot. Or I've heard people disparage Christians, and I actually come to the defense of Christians, saying, when I went down, I did a medical mission down in Guatemala with a bunch of crazy Texans, and they were mostly kind of evangelical Christians. They were very nice. Most of them were open to my alternate pathway called Buddhism, but there were a couple that would not want to talk about it. But they said, Mark, I love being with you, and you really helped out the team, and I know I'll see you in heaven. And I went, got it. In other words, I'll find the light, Rob, right? And
wow.
And then I'll find my salvation in Christianity.
Right.
And I know that narrative, but it's okay. And then others would say, that would insult me. And I went, no, it's okay. Like, one of these gals said, Mark, I prayed for you yesterday. I went, well, thank you, Shirley, because I had a bunch of little kids. And I was really freaked out that you're doing all these little kids with antiquated equipment. And she says, I'll pray for you, Mark. And someone said, that's so arrogant. And I said, no, they meant well. From her heart, that's what she does. She prays for people. She prays for me that my little kids will all do well during their surgeries.
Yeah.
So that's respecting other people's lenses.
When I hear you talk, it reminds me of the way you spoke about the way your family dealt with things that were totally unjust or and unfair.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
this sort of overwhelming, gracious, you're granting people all this space, and assuming they're doing the best they can, and giving them the most generous reading of their behavior.
Yeah, but to be in that place, you have to have done enough of your self work to not let that throw you off. And years ago, I would always go to the evangelical church with my sister, Kay's wife, and Kay's sister in Minnesota, and her husband used to go to this evangelical church. And when we'd visit them in Minneapolis, I would go to their church, and Kay wouldn't go. It was too weird for her. But I said, Kay, if you don't go to these kind of churches, you don't hear like the message that they speak, you know, how they're teaching Christianity. And I remember one of the people, parishioners, was almost arguing with me because they were saying, "You don't believe in heaven and hell," and I didn't want to be dishonest. And I said, "I'm still thinking about it, Rob. I'm not really certain." And he goes, "Well, there is a heaven and hell." I went, "Okay," and then and I realized that to be in a space to honor that with them rather than have an argument, you have to be in a strong space. And so for me, I actually go to compassion because I'm looking at these people and going, wow, your Christian world is so boxed by these extremes. You know, you're either with us or against us. Remember, Baby Bush said that once, right? You're either good or evil. And the Buddhist mind doesn't say that there's a whole bunch of gray in between.
Right.
So when I meet these Christians that have these defined boxes of way to, you know, either you're this camp or you're wrong, I'll just go, oh, okay, well, you got a lot of suffering going on because then you're going through the world going, they're either in the right club or they're all like evil people that are going to go to hell. And I'm thinking, I don't want to go through life that way. That's a lot of suffering. That's a lot of judgment. And judgment is a really good one to kind of get rid of, at least.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask is, what is it that enables you to go into that space and not lose yourself and not give in to, I don't know, some conflict? You mentioned compassion, non-judgment. Are those tools that people watching right now can grab onto and use them to carry them into spaces they wouldn't otherwise enter?
Yeah, I would say so. Again, you know, I don't know if I'm really able to tell you this maybe 20 years ago, but I would say, because I don't want to be like saying Buddhism is great, but over many, many years of study, because it's a combination of sitting on the cushion as well as doing the academic studying, because Buddhism is the training of the mind. So I think with continued practice, and you have to practice this because you have to watch where your mind is going. I feel like when you do the sitting practice, and when I go for these 7-day, 10-day retreats, what happens is the constant chatter that we have goes away, and then you get to this quiet space. Now, this is the fluffy part. My inherent belief is that everybody inherently has this ability to live with an open heart and to be compassionate, to be kind and generous. You see it when there's a disaster and you see these people pushing cars out of a flooded place, people of different color. I mean, I think that we're hardwired really to be kind and generous people. But what happens, all this other clutter we get stuck in that stuff. And so for me, when you stop and do retreat, and again, not everybody has time to do this, that gives me the chance to slow down that clutter. And I can feel the shift. When I come out of my retreats, my wife will say, boy, you're different. she'll say like 3 weeks later, she goes, you're still shifted. Like things don't shake me. I feel like I'm grounded, but it almost feels like my heart is open to just be always thinking, how can I be of help? And so like the Dalai Lama said, you know, there's real easy to be, you know,
Yeah.
here's the key. Be kind. If you can't be kind, try not to create suffering in others through your words, thoughts, and actions. Now think how it's a basic, simple thing to go through life. Before you blurt out something, think about how it might come out. Will this be hurtful to someone? Before you do some action, what might be the consequences? So try not to create suffering in others. And then if you can, be kind.
That you've already sort of led me to part of the answer, I think, of my last question to you, which will be, I mean, you mentioned before that you're not surprised by a lot of things, prejudices, experiences of inequality that we have in a place such as Marin and elsewhere. And yet I don't see you as a cynical person. I see you maybe even as a hopeful person. And I'm wondering where that comes from. And I think maybe part of the answer is what you just said, these sort of practices that do give us all the capacity to show up with our kind selves. You may disagree, but that's a bit of what I'm hearing in you. Where else do you, if you do in fact find hope, where do you find it for us right now?
Well, you know, I'm not trying to pretend I'm not cynical, because I really minimize watching the news, and I have to be honest with you, I can't. I watch this person that's called the President of the United States, and it just really breaks my heart. And I would say that for me, a lot of people are angry, you know, and for me, I would say my response is sadness, because I look at what goes on. I'm thinking, this president could be doing other than what he's doing. He could be unifying people and giving comfort to people that are grieving. So I am cynical because I'm also thinking that there's these huge stock market gyrations and all kinds of really wealthy people are benefiting from this particular president. So you can't be naive about the world, but staying in that space of cynicism, negativity is also not going to help. I think I forgot the original question, but I guess no, I would say
where you find the hope.
Well, I think what it is being with again, I have to say back to the Interfaith Council, being when I'm with my Torah study friends at Bodef Shalom, and when I'm with the Interfaith Council, when I do even just like a little morning sit with Sylvia Borstein or Donald over at Spirit Rock, you know, their messages are always hopeful. I think realistic, but hopeful, and you have to work at it. I mean, you have to really find yourself going down a negative space and kind of go, okay, I'm not going to go there. And so I purposely, I don't think, I can't remember the last time I watched CNN News, because I've just found that'll also pull you into this whole head spin of analyzing things too much and really getting away from where we need to be right here, which is ourselves. And I kind of I'm getting time zone here, but like right now, we're talking about how do we respond to the killing, Mr. Floyd, right? And there's a whole, you know, some people are smashing up buildings and they're marching, and so we had a little subgroup committee of the council meet the other day, and I think we sort of concluded that everyone's response is different. So we all have to individually just first of all look how we're responding inside to see what work that we have to do. And I think if you're a wise white person, you might go, you know, maybe the whole thing about white privilege, maybe I should look into that. And maybe that's time for me to grow. And then I'll go, and maybe not. And it's like, it's not for me to tell you that you should do that. But at least the wisdom of my friends would say, first I got to look inside what's happening in here. Then after maybe I can hear what's happening here, then find Rob and Stephanie and so on and so on, and sort of have another discussion here. And then maybe with active listening, then come to what in the Buddhist noble path, come to wise action. Do something, but do it with some wisdom in your actions. But if it means to march, then march, peaceably march. Don't smash up things. But again, everyone's path. Some people say violence is the way we're going to get our voices heard. So I would say, yeah, be careful with the company you hang out with, and let them inspire you to rise to a higher level.
Well, thank you for the way you've been our company through this hour, but also through so many of the interfaith gatherings. And I hope this conversation invites other people to join in that, because you're right. I mean, when you surround yourselves with those kinds of folks, we can really grow in a way that's meaningful. So thank you for the way you've been with us today, and for the person you are, and for sharing your story with us. That's a sacred offering.
Okay, thank you, Ron.
All right, take care, Mark.